2008, the race for the U.S. Senate is brought to you from Georgia Public Broadcasting. Here is the moderator for tonight's debate.
Good evening. I'm Jonathan Seri, an Atlanta-based correspondent with Fox News. Welcome to our continuing series of Georgia campaign debates originating from the studios of GPB. This debate is organized by the Atlanta Press Club. We also welcome the audience of GPB's statewide radio network, which is simulcasting this debate in our online audience at gpb.org. Now let's meet the candidates facing one another in the election for the U.S. Senate. They are, in alphabetical order, Libertarian Alan Buckley, an Atlanta attorney; Republican Saxby Chambliss, a current U.S. Senator from Georgia; and Jim Martin, a former Georgia State Representative. Those are the candidates, and here is the format for tonight's debate. In the first round, the panelists and I will ask one question each to be answered by all three candidates. 1 minute will be allotted for each answer. In the second round, each candidate may address a question to each of his opponents. And in the third round, our panelists will continue the questioning. At the end of the question and answer period, each candidate will make a 60-second closing statement. Now let's meet our panel of prominent Georgia journalists selected by the Atlanta Press Club. They are Jim Galloway, political columnist for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution; Lori Geary, a news correspondent specializing in politics with WSB-TV; and Charles Richardson, the editorial page editor for the Macon Telegraph. Panelists, we ask you to please limit your questions to 30 seconds in this round. The order in which the candidates will be answering has been randomly selected. We begin with Jim Galloway's question, and Jim Martin will answer first. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Gentlemen, the $700 billion bailout package passed by Congress to salvage Wall Street has transformed this particular race. Mr. Chambliss, as the incumbent, you cast a vote in favor of it. Mr. Martin and Mr. Buckley, you both say that you would have voted against it. I'd like each of you to explain your positions and discuss what you think is the proper level of federal oversight of the economy.
I think that it's important that we have federal oversight of the economy, and that's precisely the reason that I was not in favor of the bailout package. The two things that were not addressed in the bailout package was effective regulation of the financial markets and financial institutions that got us into this problem in the first place. Absent that, there was no guarantee that this wouldn't happen all over again. The second thing that was critical to this piece of legislation was adequate consumer protections to prevent predatory lending practices, which also were a root cause of this problem. The absence of those two things indicated that there really wasn't an effort to really hold the special interest accountable in Washington to make sure that before they left the room with $700 billion, that there was an agreement from the financial sector that they would be regulated to prevent these sort of abusive speculative practices from occurring, and the kinds of consumer protections would prevent consumers from being preyed on again. In the absence of those two things, we have no guarantee that this won't happen again. And now it has also been proven to us that the oversight has been woefully inadequate in this legislation. That's another problem we'll need to address tonight.
Now, Saxby Chambliss may answer.
Well, thank you. And Mr. Martin's opposed to it tonight. He's been for it. He's been against it. Tonight it's convenient to be against it, so that's where he is. I voted for this package. Was not in favor of the first package that was presented. Was not in favor of the second package that was presented. And what I said after the second package was that, look, I understand we got a problem. I talked to bankers all over this state. I talked to business people all over this state. I talked to economists. I talked to anybody I could think of who had some expertise. Everybody I talked to said, look, Saxby, we have a problem in the credit market. It is contracting to the point to where banks are not able to borrow from each other, and pretty soon we're not only going to see banks maybe failing in this country, and frankly we've seen some, but also the credit market is dried up. People are not going to be able to make automobile loans or loans to buy washers and dryers or whatever, so it was imperative we do something. I said, you got to have more oversight. No golden parachutes. We got to prosecute people that are guilty of committing criminal acts here. When all of those were addressed, we needed to do something. That's why I could vote for it.
Thank you, Senator. And now Alan Buckley.
I would have voted against it simply because it made people who weren't responsible for this mess potentially at risk for loss. And the bill could have been set up to provide the credit relief while only making those people who borrowed over their heads, the people that loaned to them, and then the banks and financial institutions that own these tainted assets potentially responsible if there was a loss at the end. Also, the bill included tax cuts without spending cuts. I like tax cuts, but they've got to be coupled with spending cuts. Saxby Chambliss continuously pushes through tax cuts without spending cuts. We're destroying the future of our kids. It's got to stop. Also, there was pork in the bill. I hate pork. What really happened here was the Federal Reserve Bank overcooked the economy. The Congress ran tax cuts without spending cuts, deficit spending, and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mae loaned to people that they shouldn't have loaned to. In the future, if we change the role of the Federal Reserve Bank so their sole objective is stable prices instead of trying to create prosperity followed by recessions, and we force the Congress to balance the budget every year we're not in a depression or a severe recession, and privatize Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, we'll solve all the problems.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Lori Geary, it's now your turn to ask a question, and Alan Buckley will again answer.
Hi, gentlemen. I want to stay on the economy because it's the most important issue out there right now on the minds of voters. There's a lot of talk in Washington right now about another stimulus plan to get the economy going. Do you think that's what we need? And if you do think that's what we need, what do you think should be in it? And should there be another refund check?
Let me say, first of all, people, this race is almost definitely going to a runoff, so please vote your conscience. Please vote what's in the best interest of our country and future generations. I would be against another stimulus package. This was funded totally on debt, more deficits. Let me tell you what the GAO, that's the Government Accountability Office, that's the audit arm of the federal government, tells us. They said, this is a direct quote, GAO's current long-term simulations continue to show ever larger deficits, resulting in a federal debt burden that ultimately spirals out of control. If that happens, the dollar will become worthless, the stock market will collapse, businesses will fail, and we will not be able to defend ourselves. I called the GAO and I said, do you see this under both Republicans and Democrats? Yes, we see it under any scenario plausible under the two major parties. And it's going to happen unless you get people in there like me who are financially responsible. I'm a CPA and I'm fiscally conservative. Balance the budget every year.
Saxby Chambliss, you may ask.
Well, I am not in favor of this additional $300 billion bailout that the Democrats and leadership in Congress is promoting. And the reason I'm not is that we've got this plan out there now. We need to give it a chance to work. We've committed to that $125 billion is going to go to the 9 largest banks. We're going to get all of that money back plus 5% interest within 5 years. We're not going to lose a dime on that money. The second $125 billion is scheduled to go out to community banks. We need to let them see if that will not put liquidity, integrity, and confidence in the marketplace. And if it does, then that should take care of the situation. If it doesn't, then we can step back and look at it again. There's a trigger that can be pulled that will allow access to another $100 billion. We'll see if that is needed, whether that needs to be accessed by the Treasury. But just saying that we need to take another $300 billion and distribute around the country will not get us out of this problem.
And finally, Jim Martin.
How outrageous. How outrageous. Saxby Chambliss Economics is taking care of the people at the top. They left Washington without extending unemployment benefits. How outrageous. We need to make sure we take care of the middle class, and that's what the stimulus package would do. It would look out trying to get people to work, trying to create infrastructure in this country, getting people back to work. You know, this bailout plan now, we've read in the paper where the money is being used for acquisition of other banks, for dividends for shareholders, for compensation for executives. That's Saxby Economics. From the top down, I believe we need to have a stimulus package that will look at helping the middle class in this country. They're in real trouble. They are really hurting. And it's incredible to me that this bailout package has been so ineffectively administered by this administration.
Since he's mentioned, I get to respond to that. Jim, let me just ask you something. You just made a statement that this money is going to be used to pay dividends, to pay salaries. Who's going to do it? Tell me which bank's going to do that. Well, give me one bank that's going to do that.
Well, PNC is buying National City Bank.
Yeah, and because they are loaded with toxic loans, and that's what the funds are for, Jim. Who's going to use it to pay dividends?
If you would start reading the newspapers, Saxby, and stop believing the people at the top and start looking out for the middle class, you'd understand how hard people are suffering in this country.
Tell me one bank. They are not using it for dividends, Jim. Tell me one bank.
They're using it to buy other banks, and if you look at any newspaper, Washington Post for one, there's stories about that right now. You just need to start reading the newspapers,
Jim,
Saxby.
you need to get your facts straight as usual.
And Mr. Buckley, you look like you're chomping at the bit to chime in.
I just like to say, you know, both of these men, you read their ads, they're wasting our time. We got major financial problems, as I'm going to point out over the course of this debate. And I'm the only one who's addressing them, okay? I'm the only one who's saying we need to cut spending substantially. I'm saying 25%. I've laid out where I would do it. balance the budget, start investing Social Security surpluses, cut taxes. Look what they're selling. More fiscal irresponsibility.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Charles Richardson, your question goes first to Saxby Chambliss.
Well, first of all, condolences to all three of you. You all have ties to the University of Georgia, and right now the Georgia faithful aren't feeling too good. Mr. Buckley, I guess you feel all right because you've got some ties to the University of Florida. But the question is, here you are, let's say you're standing in the Senate chamber, and you're presented with the same facts that the senators were faced with 2 or 3 weeks ago. What would you have done differently? If you could have written a bill that would have gone through facing the facts that they saw, what would you have done differently?
Are you asking me?
I think it comes to me first, Charles, right? Well, thanks for your condolences. Let me tell you, it was a rough day. Well, let me say this. When the third package came out, as I said you got to have more oversight. We got to make sure that anybody who committed criminal activity needs to be handcuffed, taken to jail, prosecuted, and locked up. And that's happening today. We have subpoenas going out. I said there can't be golden parachutes. Anybody like Franklin Raines, who is now an economic advisor to Barack Obama, who took $100 million out of Fannie Mae after he ran it into the ground. You can't have that sort of situation occur again. You can't have money going from this fund to groups like Acorn, for gosh sakes, to build low-income housing around the country. Those are the things that needed to come out of there. They did come out of there. And when I talked to business people around the state who said, Saxby, if you don't do something and do it soon, I'm going to start laying off people, you better believe it was time to act, and I think we did act in the most responsible way that with the facts which we had.
Jim Martin, you may answer.
See, that's the problem with Saxby Chambliss economics. He doesn't realize the reason we got into this problem was the lack of regulation of the financial institutions. That's precisely how we got into this problem. They got too big, they got too speculative, there was no regulation of the commodities market, so the credit default swaps were a pyramid getting ready to fall. And so the first thing I would have said, and I've said this when Secretary Paulson first came to the Congress, before any bill was passed, I had a press conference. And I said that it needed to have, the bailout package needed to have regulation of the financial institutions to prevent this from happening again. That's Saxby Chambliss economics. That's what got us into this problem in the first place. And then there need to be adequate consumer protections. When I ran for lieutenant governor, I raised the problem of foreclosures based on predatory lending. Unfortunately, I was right. I would have insisted on that because I have been standing up for the middle class my entire political career, and I'll do that in Washington.
Alan Buckley, your answer.
Yeah, I issued 2 press releases before the bill was enacted offering ways to solve the problem. And they did involve potentially loaning the money to solve the credit problem. But the only people who would be potentially at risk for loss after the assets were purchased and then sold would be people who borrowed over their heads, the people that loaned to them, the companies that loaned to them, and then the financial institutions that own the tainted assets. An example I gave was over 3 years the Treasury buys the assets, tries selling them, and let's say that it comes up with a $100 billion loss. Well, you apply a 1% gross income tax to individuals who borrowed over their heads, a 1% gross receipts tax to companies that loan to them, and to these banks indefinitely until you recover the total loss plus interest plus a 20% penalty for putting us all through this. And that way, the only people who would pay for this potential fix would be the people who were responsible for it. And that completely works, and that's what I would have done.
I have a question for all three of you, and we'll start with Alan Buckley. Obviously, the Senate race is contentious. Just look at the sparring that's already going on here. And you look at the state. You talk about blue and red counties, and you look at the nation, so politically polarized. If elected, what would you do to heal wounds and work across party lines over the next 6 years? Mr. Buckley.
Well, if I'm elected, it would be a political gunshot heard around the world, not just around the country, around the world. We've had Republicans and Democrats in the Senate for, I don't know, 150 years or more. And let's put it this way, if I'm elected, you would see change, I mean real change, not Obama type change, but real change, because people would wake up and say, oh my God, we no longer control everything, the two major parties. A third party has gotten in. And what did he get in on? What did he get in on? He was preaching fiscal responsibility, taking care of future generations, stop living for today to the detriment of tomorrow. Again, these debts are going to spiral out of control. If that happens, we are all going to be miserable. And these aren't left-wingers who are saying this or right-wingers. This is coming directly from the federal government. I get all my information directly from the federal government. So you want to see real change, you put me in the United States Senate, we will see change like we've never seen it before. Positive change.
Saxby Chambliss.
Well, Jonathan and I have got a long record of stepping across the aisle and reaching out to friends to make real reforms in the way that Washington operates. Most recent examples just this summer with respect to the Farm Bill, which was a bipartisan bill put together by Republicans and Democrats. Then we had an energy package that we worked on in a very bipartisan way. Could not have been any more reaching across the aisle from both sides. Unfortunately, the rancor has increased in Washington, and unfortunately it gets to a point sometimes where what happens is you have Republicans with ideas, Democrats with ideas, they butt heads on the floor, and guess what happens to issues of interest to people? Nothing. That's why I thought it was critically important that when gas was $4 a gallon, that we do something about it. And now, look where we are. We've lifted the moratorium on offshore drilling. We can't take all the credit for gas being $2.50 here in Atlanta tonight, or $2.18 as it was in Moultrie this morning. But that's part of what working together will do.
You should take 0% of the credit, because that's what you're entitled to. Thank you, Adam. You're welcome.
And finally,
Jim stepping up. GAO probably told him that.
Well, that's a fair question. I'm not going to make the mistake that the Republicans made 8 years ago. This country is about divided just about in half on two sides. And the Republicans thought that they had a very narrow victory, a mandate for radical right-wing ideas. And I don't think that's the case. I think if the Democrats are successful in winning a substantial number in the Congress, members of the Congress, and in winning the presidency, we have an obligation to reach across party lines to deal with these issues that are dividing this country and the very important issues we need to address in this country. The economy is not a partisan issue. We made a lot of mistakes. There's plenty of blame to go around, but it needs to be fixed. The environment is crying out for somebody to address those issues. We need to do something about our foreign policy to reclaim our leadership in the world, our moral leadership in the world. We need to end the war in Iraq with honor and be able to try to address the issues in Afghanistan and Pakistan so that we can protect our country from terrorism. Those are not partisan issues, and so as a Democrat, I'm not going to make the mistake that the Republicans made and believe that we've got a mandate for a narrow agenda, but we have an American agenda that needs to be addressed.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. That concludes round one of questions. In the second round, each candidate will have the opportunity to ask 2 questions. Please limit those questions to 30 seconds. 1 minute will be allowed for answers, and the questioner then has 30 seconds for rebuttal. Please let us know which of your opponents should answer. The order of questions has been determined by random drawing, and so the first question will be asked by Saxby Chambliss.
Jim, recently your colleagues, should you go to the Senate, Barney Frank, Nancy Pelosi, and Harry Reid, have said that the first thing that's going to happen with a new administration, a Democratic administration in the White House, a Democratic-controlled House, a Democratic-controlled Senate, is to cut the defense budget by 25% and to take that money and to use it to spend on additional social programs. And they're going to do this with your vote. What's your reaction to that reduction in the defense spending by 25%, particularly in a time of war, Jim?
They're not going to have my vote. You know, I'm not going to vote for that.
They said they were.
You said with my vote. They don't have my vote. I won't vote for that because I don't believe now is the time to cut back on defense spending. Should we be smarter about how we employ our forces across the world? Sure. Should we end the war in Iraq that cost us $10 billion a month? Yes. But we need to make sure we have a strong military. We need to protect our country. Certainly we have a lot of bases in Georgia that are important to our economy. We need to make sure they continue to have their strong participation in our national defense. So that's one issue I would not vote with them on. I would argue with the president against it. You know, that's one of the roles of a United States senator, particularly a senator of the same party, is to stand up to the president of your own party when you think they're wrong and say, Mr. President or Madam President, I'm going to support you when you run for president again, but you're just wrong on this. And time after time after time, Saxby Chambliss had the opportunity to do that and never did it with George Bush. And that's a mistake, and I won't make that mistake.
30-second rebuttal.
Well, Jim, you said never did it. When he came out and said he wanted us to oppose the WRDA bill, I not only opposed him on that, I voted to override his veto. When he came out in opposition to the Farm Bill, I said, Mr. President, you're wrong. I voted against him. I voted to override his veto twice. When he came out with the Medicare bill and said we don't need to fix the doctor's issue in here, I said, Mr. President, you're wrong. I voted against him. I voted to override his veto. So let's don't get into this. This is what I would do, because they've already said what you will do. And that's why they're pumping all this
Senator,
money in here
up.
to get you, try to get your vote.
And now we're going to return the favor to Jim Martin. It's your turn to ask a question.
Well, Saxby, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. We had this discussion at the last debate, and you said that there were adequate protections in the bailout bill to keep the taxpayers from being abused and taken advantage of. I'm under the impression, from what I read, that banks are in fact going to use some of that money to purchase other banks. I'm also under the impression that some of this money is being used to pay for stockholder dividends. You told me that all the money was going to be used to unfreeze credit. Is that right, or is that wrong, or is there something wrong with the legislation that allows the banks to do that?
Jim, I'm going to get you a copy of it, because obviously you have not read the law that passed. All of the money has got to be used to free up the credit market, and there are different ways to do that. One is buying toxic loans. The bank you referred to is a bank that's fixing to fail. Now, we think we can either let that bank fail and have people lose their life savings, or we can have one of the banks who's going to get some of the money in this buy that bank and buy those toxic loans. That's fine with me. You also said that there weren't adequate protections in there from a compensation standpoint in that same argument you made that night. You haven't read Section 111. I urge you to go back and look at it, because there is absolutely no way any of these banks can use this money to increase the compensation by giving golden parachutes to these individuals.
That's your statement. You're saying before the public tonight that there's no way that money can be used to increase pay compensation to executives who are leaving the company. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying there is a provision, and go read it. Section 111 talks about compensation of officers. And in there is more than adequate statements saying that any bank that participates in this program cannot use this funds to do what happened to Franklin Raines, and that is to get $100 million after he rolled a company into the ground and caused part of this problem we're in. It's absolutely spelled out in there.
Time is up, gentlemen. We're going to move on to Alan Buckley. It's your turn to ask a question of the candidate of your choice.
I don't think it is spelled out in there. But in any event, Saxby, the current last year's deficit was $455 billion. You take out Social Security surplus and invest it, it's $534. You add in special appropriations for Iraq and Afghanistan, it's $634 billion. That's on revenue of $2.5 trillion. And the current debts exceed $10 trillion. The GAO says we make the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts permanent without cutting spending. By the 2030s, our debts are spiraling out of control. Well, my question to you is, every year that you've been in the House and every year that you've been in the Senate, non-defense spending has increased and adjusted for inflation. Every year that you've been in the House and every year that you've been in the Senate, non-defense spending has increased. What would you cut from the budget? We're at $634 billion of deficit to balance the budget. And I happen to have the federal...
Sir, your question, please.
Okay.
I believe your question is, what would you cut?
What would you cut? Lately he said he would cut spending. We need to cut spending.
Can I answer?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd cut the Internal Revenue Service, which you want to maintain.
That adds $38 billion.
Please let the senator answer.
You know how I'm going to do that, Jim, Alan, and you should have taken your pill tonight, Alan. Listen,
I think you needed a whole bottle.
Spending has gotten out of control, and as you well know, I haven't voted for all those appropriation bills. There are a lot of the appropriation bills that I have voted against. But this is we're in a difficult time in this country. I voted to reduce spending for 4 years in a row when I was first elected in order to balance the budget, and we did it. We operated under a balanced budget until 2001. And after September 11, unfortunately, what we found out is that there are an awful lot of homeland security measures that have to be in place in order to protect America, in order to protect Americans. It became necessary to spend more money than what we thought. Obviously, we're in the midst of a military conflict. That is expensive. I want to see that ended as much as anybody else. But now, the price of freedom is expensive, and America demands that, and Americans demand that.
30 seconds.
Once again, he came up with zero, for the record, zero spending cuts. The IRS actually brings in about 5 times its cost each year. In 2006, it brought in $49 billion. Its budget came in just under 11. So you've added $38 billion to the deficit right there, taking it to $672 billion. I've enumerated where I'd cut spending, 25% across the board. Saxby, you're trying to blame everything on defense. Again, this is all non-defense spending, and it's growing in exponential terms, and you are responsible for it. You're a spendaholic. You are not fiscally fit to be in the United States Senate.
And we are going to move on to your second question. Mr. Buckley, you may go ahead.
Jim Martin.
Sir.
Okay. Dave Walker, Comptroller General until earlier this year, just wrote an article this past Thursday in CNN Money, and it's titled, "Call This a Crisis, Just Wait." And what he says in the first sentence is, "Staring into the abyss always focuses the mind, which can help you avoid falling in. So let's take a look at the potential catastrophe that awaits us once we survive our current crisis."
Gentlemen, I have to remind you, this is kind of like the game show Jeopardy. You must phrase it as a question.
Okay. What he says, this is, again, the Comptroller General until earlier this year, says Medicare and Social Security are going to bankrupt our country very soon, and this is going to get very ugly, much worse than the bailout that we just are experiencing. The bailout's like a little tiny iceberg compared to a triangular iceberg that's 20 size that.
And your question would be?
My question, what has Saxby Chambliss done about these problems, and what would you do about them?
Well, he's done one thing very serious, which was to prevent the negotiation with drug companies over the price of drug in Medicare Part D. That's cost the taxpayers billions of dollars. That's unfair, unfortunate, and unthrifty. It's not a way to run a government. We've got to look at the cost of health care. We've got to move toward health care reform that provides a system where there's a comprehensive system that's of quality, that's available to all Americans. Now, that can be done in the public and private sector. That's the elephant under the tent, so to speak, in this problem, because it's causing problems for our industrial base, it's causing problems for our government. We need to deal with that issue. I think Social Security, with the right kind of bipartisan approach, can be made solvent. But Medicare is the one that bothers me most. And why in the world Saxby Chambliss would have voted not to allow us to negotiate with drug companies over price is unbelievable.
Okay.
Well, let me...
Well, actually, since you brought both of your opposing candidates in, I think in fairness we need to give Saxby Chambliss...
Let me explain why, Jim, because, you know, we do that at the Veterans Administration, and it works very well. The VA negotiates their own drug prices. The problem is the VA negotiates drugs for about 20% of the amount of drugs, I'm talking about numbers of drugs, than does Medicare. Medicare recipients have a much broader need than does the VA. That 80% of drugs, additional drugs that the Medicare recipients want and need, I want to make sure they got them. What you're talking about doing is negotiating drugs that will, 20% of the drugs will be available to Medicare recipients. I don't think that's right. And by the way, we have tried to make some changes in Social Security. We tried to make it solvent because we do know we're going to be spending more money on Social Security by 2017 than we're taking in Social Security taxes. It's got to be addressed for the next generation. If we don't get responsible about it, and we have been blocked by the Democrats time and time again,
and time for a 30-second
There's a lot of finger pointing, but I'm the only one in this race who offers solutions to these problems. Look on my website, Buckley4FORSenate.com. They involve sacrifice. I will not lie, but they work. And if we don't sacrifice and start solving these problems, our kids and their kids are going to have a miserable adulthood. That's the reality of it, and that's morally wrong. Let me say this. If you take... The GAO said if you take the present value of Medicare and Social Security's benefits, discount the present value, add the current debt, you get $53 trillion. The total net worth of all Americans combined last year was $58 trillion. That means we are insolvent, and the government must consume all wealth to keep going.
Up. We're going to move on to Senator Chambliss. Your second question, please.
Okay, well, let's stick with that issue. Mr. Buckley, you say you want to cut Social Security and Medicare.
I never said that.
Well, that's what you just said.
I didn't say I would cut Social Security. You're lying.
You said you
lied on the radio and heard the Herman Cain show. Told everybody that I want to cut Social Security.
Let him ask his question, please.
You want to cut Social Security and Medicare. You said that in our last debate.
Yes. Medicare.
No, I never. Social Security is one of the means of income, sometimes the only means of income for individuals. Why would you want to cut that from them? And with respect to Medicare, what do you want to cut there? Do you want to cut out the ability to select physicians? Do you want to cut out the reimbursement to physicians? Do you want to cut out drugs? What do you want to cut in Medicare and Social Security?
I'll tell you right now. First of all, I want to say this. The United States Senator lied on the radio on Herman Cain show, said I wanted to cut, I would cut Social Security. That's not true. What I've said time and time again is we have a national referendum to let the people decide. Do we either increase the tax rate from 6.2 to 7 or cut benefits by 11%? That's what I've said. That's different from saying you're going to cut Social Security. I've also said for younger people born after 1985, they have to get matching contributions, dollar for dollar, up to an average worker's pay. They'll also get a part-defined benefit, part-defined contribution in terms of Social Security benefits. We invest the surpluses that are expected to exist between now and 2017. Medicare, okay, I've said Part A we need to have 20% coinsurance instead of $1,000 or so deductible and then on the house for 60 days. Medicare Part B, instead of a 75-25% program where the government, everybody pays 75, we make it more of a 50-50 program. Part D, we get rid of it except for catastrophic coverage, and we negotiate for group prices. We make these transitions over a 5-year period. It all works.
Time is up. 30-second rebuttal.
Well, obviously you say you're going to eliminate Part D. Well, you know, Part D is a prescription drug benefit. Millions and millions of seniors today are getting drugs they need that are going to allow them to stay out of the hospital, stay out of nursing homes, and stay at home because Part D is available to them. The program is working. We put competition in the marketplace, and now after we got over the first initial bumps in the road, that program is really working. It's costing less than what we expected it to. Seniors wanted it, they love it, and I'm going to continue to support it. Time
to move on to Jim Martin's second question.
Ms. Saxby, in the last debate, we had a discussion about lobbyists. I don't know if you remember that. And you had indicated that you've never taken trips with lobbyists. I think that's what you said. And I had a chance to look into that a little bit. And there's a PAC that you have called the Fund for Republican Majority, I believe. And I looked at the disclosure statement, and there were numbers of trips to expensive golf resorts that I believe lobbyists were in attendance at those events. Were you wrong then, or am I misstating the situation?
No, what you asked me was, do I take trip with lobbyists? And I said, no, I don't. The ethics rules don't permit it, Jim. Now, do I have fundraisers and invite lobbyists? Sure I do, and I raise money. You did a fundraiser in Washington about 3 weeks ago. I'm betting you lobbyists were there. Same thing, Jim. I do raise money. I have to try to combat the real negative ads that you've been running.
So you do take trips with lobbyists?
I don't take trips with lobbyists. I have fundraisers, Jim, just like you have done. And lobbyists
Were there lobbyists there at Boca Raton?
They did not take a trip with me, Jim. I didn't take a trip with them. The ethics rules don't permit that. Now, if you think I violated the ethics rule, have at it, but I can tell you I am in 100% strict compliance with the people of Georgia.
I'm not concerned about the ethics rule, but I think in the last debate when you said you do not take trips with lobbyists, and there again you go down to Boca Raton and play golf with lobbyists, that was a misstatement.
I don't take trip with lobbyists, Jim. That's what you asked me, and I answered it correctly, and I'm answering it correctly again tonight.
30-second rebuttal.
Well, when I was Commissioner of Georgia Department of Human Resources, 2 weeks after 9/11, became commissioner, and we had to reduce the department's budget by $150 million. I refused to take a pay raise. In fact, it was the hardest thing for me to do to give up my pay raise. The paperwork was extraordinary, but I thought it was the important thing to do. And that's what's wrong with Washington right now. People going around with lobbyists to expensive golf resorts, passing legislation to bail out their buddies, and they're not really concerned about the middle class. And that was the point of that question, to say that we need to change things in Washington, and we need to make sure that somebody's there to stand up for the middle class.
Mr. Martin, your time's up. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, that concludes our second round of questioning. For our third round, we will return to our panel of journalists. From this point until the closing statements, the panel members and I will ask questions of the candidate of our choice. Candidates will be allowed 1 minute to respond, and as moderator, I will determine whether either opposing candidate will be given 30 seconds for rebuttal. We begin this round of questioning with Jim Galloway of the AJC. Jim.
Thank you. Mr. Buckley, Mr. Chambliss supports a shift from a federal income tax to a national sales tax, which in one form is known as the fair tax. You and Mr. Martin, or your surrogates, have attacked Mr. Chambliss for this position. You, in fact, Mr. Buckley, have called the fair tax a sham. Would you elaborate, please?
First of all, Saxby's just using all you fair tax zealots out there. He's lost you on the real issue, which is spending, and he realizes it. So his strategy is to get you back with the fair tax, which you know will never be enacted. I mean, Saxby, when the Republicans controlled everything recently, did he push to get the fair tax passed? No. He and Linder could have pushed it through if it's such a great plan. He's the great leader that he claims to be. But he never even tried, so you're being used. I'm sorry, that's just the reality. Let me say this, if you put in the real rate, which is roughly double the rate, that's according to the Joint Committee on Taxation, this is the revenue neutral rate compared to the rate in the bill, and the President's Advisory Panel on Federal Tax Reform, you put in the real rate and basically you shift the much of the tax burden from corporations and wealthy individuals to the middle class and retirees. I've got an example. Retiree couple with $27,000 of income pays nothing now. They pay over $10,000 on the fair tax. Middle class family, $50,000 of income, pays about $7,000 now. They pay $17,000. Homes would lose 10 to 29% of their value in the year of enactment.
I'm going to call time, and because this has been such a contentious issue of the campaign, including the campaign commercials between Mr. Martin and Senator Chambliss, I'd like to give each of you a 30-second rebuttal. Let's start with Jim Martin.
Well, I believe the fair tax takes the focus off the real issue, which is the economy. I do believe that a 23% sales tax, actually much more than that, on working people who spend their paychecks and shift that burden to the middle class away from the upper class is a mistake in these difficult times, and I'm not in favor of the fair tax, so-called fair tax.
Senator?
Well, what these guys support is keeping the system as is. And under the current system, there's an average tax paid by an individual of 32%. What we do in the fair tax is take that away. You get all your income tax deductions from your paycheck added back to your paycheck. You get a check from the federal government every month if you're a low-income individual, so it'll be a wash for you. And at the same time, we let people control how much they pay in taxes, not have the government mandate to them what they pay in taxes.
Let's move down the line to Lori Geary.
Well, since we're on the issue of taxes, my question is for Mr. Martin. You talk a lot on the campaign trail about the middle class. We've heard a lot about Barack Obama's economic plan and his belief in spreading the wealth. My question is, among the details that Barack Obama's plan calls for is a tax increase for those who make $250,000 or more. Is this a fair cutoff in your estimation, and is this a plan that you could support?
I don't know what the fair cutoff is. $250,000 is what's been talked about. I do believe that we need to have middle-class tax relief. I do believe it's not a matter of raising taxes. It's a matter of allowing the Bush tax cuts that we couldn't afford in the first place to expire. If that happens, then we're able to deal with middle-class tax relief. The middle class in this country is really hurting, and I like the features of Senator Obama's plan that provide immediate relief to working men and women. That is the infrastructure that's endangering this country of being destroyed. And if we're going to get this economy moving again, we need to do that, move forward with middle-class tax relief, and I'm committed to do that along with Senator Obama.
Let's see where the other candidates weigh in. Senator Chambliss?
Sure. Well, first of all, the $250,000 is now down to $120,000 based upon what Governor Richardson said this morning. Everybody earning over $120,000 is going to have a huge tax increase. That includes virtually every small business. Now, I've been around the state over the last 12 days to every corner. Every small business person I've talked to said the first thing I'm going to do is start laying off people when this tax comes in. Jim says he would have voted against the rescue package, which had the AMT in it, AMT relief, which anybody earning $70,000 is going to get hit with $2,000 additional dollars that Senator, he says he would have voted against, and I voted to relieve him of that.
Mr. Buckley.
First of all, Saxby Chambliss says I support the current system. That's absolutely not true. He's even said in prior debates that we all agree the current system needs to be fixed, and I advocate a very simple individual income tax system, 4 deductions, a poverty level exemption, 1 lower rate, and then the X rate. And X is whatever's necessary to balance the budget for the year. It's 9th grade algebra. The more that's spent, the higher the X rate is. The less that's spent, the lower the X rate is. And we balance the budget every year and stop destroying the future of our children and our grandchildren, which is morally wrong. I'm the only one who's providing solutions to the real problems of our country, the financial problems.
Moving down the line to Charles Richardson.
This question is for Saxby. When that $700 billion plan landed at the Senate's doorstep, how did it grow by $150 billion?
Well, it grew because of the AMT. We had a tax extender package that was added to that because that bill had passed the Senate by 95-2, I think was the number. Nancy Pelosi wouldn't bring it up in the House. A tax extender bill is passed virtually every year. What it says is that we have certain tax credits, certain tax deductions, certain tax benefits that expire annually, and we extend those bills. That's what this bill was about. Now, we added the AMT fix in there, and it is not paid for because we did not find the offsets to pay for it. But it was not fair to charge middle-class America with an alternative minimum tax. And if it meant paying for it, I would much rather make sure those individuals earning $70,000 to $75,000 a year don't get hit with another $2,000 in taxes to have the subsequent stimulus package that the Democrats are talking about. The cost of that package was $150 billion. We had another $106 billion in there that was totally paid for.
Mr. Buckley and Mr. Martin, I'll let you weigh in on this.
Again, there's a tremendous amount of tax cuts, more than just AMT relief in that bill that's now the act. There are new tax provisions, new tax relief, but no spending cuts except one tiny little sliver in the very last couple of pages that's in the non-qualified plan area. Again, I would not vote for anything, unless it was financially sound. In other words, I like tax cuts, but they've got to be paid for now, with immediate spending cuts, now. Not talking about sometime in the future, because we are destroying the future of our kids. It's wrong.
Mr. Martin.
Well, the people I talk across the state realize that Washington is a mess. And that tax policy is based on who has the most money to contribute to campaigns and the special interests. We need to have a fair tax system, but before we get to a fair tax system, we need to balance our budget. We need to make hard decisions about what we can afford and what we can't afford, and then develop a fair system to pay for it. And I think Americans are willing to do that. But right now, we really do need middle-class tax relief, and I'm committed to do that, to work with Senator Obama if he's elected president, or with John McCain if he's elected president, to make sure we save that infrastructure in this country.
Gentlemen, I'd like to ask a question about foreign policy. I'd like each of you to weigh in, but I'll address it to Senator Chambliss. There's been a lot of discussion and debate about Iraq, but Afghanistan, after the Iraq invasion, seemed to take a back seat in the news. So I'd like to revisit it. How would you grade U.S. operations in Afghanistan, and what still needs to be done, Senator?
Well, we've got real issues in Afghanistan. It's a different operation from Iraq because it's a NATO operation. Now, while that means our commanders are in place, we still operate under NATO guidelines. When we went into Afghanistan after September 11, we kicked the enemy pretty good, and we can do it again. As we downsize in Iraq, I suspect that it's going to be necessary to add more U.S. troops into Afghanistan. We're seeing the drug trade growing again there. We've got to address this poppy issue in Afghanistan. We know bin Laden is somewhere on the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. We got to go get him. We got to go get him now. It's going to take more U.S. troops to do that. The situation in Iraq is really coming to a halt, and our men and women in uniform have done such a great job there. It's now time to put more focus on Afghanistan, and I think you're going to see that happen under the leadership of David Petraeus.
Mr. Martin.
I grade the efforts of our soldiers, men and women in uniform, A+. They've done exactly what they have been asked to do, and it's incredible, and I salute them all. I know we all on this panel do. We did take our eye off the ball in Afghanistan. We almost had al-Qaeda eliminated. The Taliban was totally in disarray, and we took our eye off the ball. Went on to invade Iraq, took our eye off the ball, removed our troops and our focus from Iraq, and now we're paying for it. We need to move forward to make sure we find al-Qaeda, eliminate al-Qaeda and bin Laden, and do that in Iraq. Do that in Afghanistan.
Mr. Buckley.
The first thing we need to do in Afghanistan is learn from history, learn from the experience of the British, the experience of the Russians, It's a very difficult terrain, a very difficult people. We need to set our objective first off. What is our objective? And then figure out the most efficient way of achieving that objective. And it may be that using less troops is the most efficient way of achieving that objective. And that's where I think that the CIA needs to work with our generals in the military and figure out what is the most efficient way to accomplish our objectives. And I think the objective should be solely directed at stopping terrorism.
Jim Galloway.
Let's change the topic a little bit and talk about some of these television ads that Mr. Chambliss and Mr. Martin have been running. Mr. Martin, TV ads issued by your surrogate, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, mentioned Mr. Chambliss's vote for the $700 million Wall Street bailout at nearly every opportunity and in a very negative fashion. But if I'm not mistaken, the majority of Senate Democrats, led by Harry Reid, voted for the rescue plan. Why shouldn't we consider these TV ads cynical at best?
Because they're not personal. I'm not challenging Saxby Chambliss as a human being in my ads. I'm talking about a policy difference between me and Saxby Chambliss. Look at his ads. They're personal attacks. And that's the difference. There's some major differences in this country, no doubt about it, between me and Saxby Chambliss. We were fraternity brothers. It's not personal. But the differences in philosophy could not be more important. I believe that we need to get this economy moving again and take care of the middle class. He believes in top-down economics, Saxby Chambliss economics, and that's where we disagree.
Mr. Chambliss.
As a matter of fact, he doesn't answer the question again. Jim, that's one of the problems that we've had is getting you to really answer these tough questions. The fact is that it is cynical, Jim, because, Chuck Schumer from New York is dictating to Jim what he's to say and when he's to say it. The Senatorial Committee that Chuck Schumer heads up took $25 million from Wall Street, and they're accusing me of taking dollars that was impossible for me to get from Wall Street, and yet I voted for it because it was the right thing to do. I'm confident the Democrats that voted for it thought it was the right thing to do. Jim Martin is trying to take political advantage of that.
Time is up. Moving down the line.
Gentlemen, I want to focus on an issue that we all dealt with this past summer. Metro Atlanta dealt with yet another gas crisis after 2 hurricanes hit the Gulf. It's clear that Georgia has to find a way to get gas from another place other than the Gulf. My question to Mr. Martin, what do you propose?
Well, there needs to be better planning. What happened, there was a crisis that occurred not only because of the hurricane, but because we were moving from one blend of gas to another because of our air quality issues in Atlanta. And there was absence of any real planning at the state level that has caused a real problem. And I think, frankly, it's not a matter of developing new sources. It's a matter of doing a better job of planning so that we don't run through these artificial shortages of gasoline. And I'll work with the governor and with the legislature as a United States Senator to make sure that the federal government does what it can to help the state deal with these sort of shortages that are based on spot scarcities.
And considering that everyone in this room, I would hazard a bet, waited in those same gas lines, right. I'll let the two of you weigh in, starting with Mr. Buckley.
Well, I agree with Jim Martin that the state was largely at fault, but I don't think the federal government should be getting involved in creating pipelines. That's mainly something for the private sector. I do think we should change our energy policy to basically work such that the dirtier a fuel is, the more tax it bears, the cleaner a fuel is, the less tax it bears. I'm a big fan of hydrogen. It burns completely cleanly. We're going to see electric cars next year. But also we need to create economic incentives for companies that come up with breakthroughs that are significantly cleaner than conventional fuels, cost significantly less, and spark economic activity.
Senator.
Well, I'm in favor of drilling more, drilling in America where we know we've got the resources, and drilling often. We've got to drill more offshore. We've got to drill in the eastern half of the Gulf of Mexico. The reason we had the problem, Lori, is that all of the refineries in the United States of America are located close to where the sources are, and that's the western half of the Gulf of Mexico. If we drill offshore and have successful finds around the country, what you're going to see is refineries sprout up close to the sources. And if we have refineries built in the northeast or in the northwest or wherever it may be, then we won't have to worry as much about hurricanes going through the Gulf, striking those refineries like they did and caused our problems here in Atlanta.
Thank you, gentlemen. Moving on to Charles Richardson.
You pick which one wants to answer this first. By every objective measure, American students are lagging behind the rest of the world. What would you specifically do about that? and add in there, does the No Child Left Behind Act, should that be reauthorized or adjusted? Alan?
As part of my spending cuts that I propose eliminating the Department of Education. That would save about $69 billion a year. Since the federal government has gotten heavily involved in education, the Department of Education was created in 1979, a year after I got out of high school. We've seen basically no positive progress. You know, some reports show negative results, some show slight positive results, but there's been no significant positive impact of the federal involvement in education. And No Child Left Behind is just a bureaucratic mess. I just think the more locally education is handled, the better off we all are. And again, I mean, education mainly comes down to good parents and kids that have the right attitude and good teachers. That triangle is the main thing that you need. There's no reason that all can't be handled locally. Again, the federal government it's just a waste of money. It's a bureaucracy. None of the teachers like it. I've never heard a single teacher who likes it. Eliminate it. Let it be handled locally.
Saxby Chambliss.
Well, Charles, what I'm in favor of is what I voted for on the floor of the Senate, what I worked very closely with my friend Lamar Alexander from Tennessee on, and that is what we call the America Competes Act. We've got a problem in this country today in that we used to graduate about 700,000 engineers every year. We used to graduate folks that went into medicine, that went into medical research, who now, unfortunately, since September 11, part of the problem has been we're not with our visa program. These folks can't get in here. And also, folks have been going to Wall Street because they can make more money on Wall Street, and they're moving away from that. Today, China and India are graduating about 700,000 engineers a year. We're graduating about 300. America Competes Act says that we're going to promote math and science in K through 12, not beginning in the 8th grade. And when we do that, when we incentivize teachers to spend more time on math and science and become certified in math and science, and let's award them bonuses for doing that. When we fund that act, we're going to change the dynamics of education in America.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Producer tells me that the time for questions has expired. I'm terribly sorry.
I'll just say, I know there are a lot of students that are watching this, and you're doing a good job, and I'm proud of you. We do have problems in this country. And we need to address them. The federal government ought to be a partner with local governments and local school systems by funding the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is part of the No Child Left Behind, was an amendment to provide adequate federal resources to work with local states and local school boards to deal with education.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much. The time for questions has expired. It's now time for closing statements from our candidates in the race for U.S. Senate. Each candidate's going to have 60 seconds. The order of the closing statements was randomly determined before the broadcast. The first statement will come from Alan Buckley.
Again, this race is headed for a runoff, so I ask you to vote your conscience. Our state needs and deserves a great senator. Saxby Chambliss is not and never will be a great senator. I think he is less than a mediocre senator. From farm subsidies to pork to sugar factory explosions, he serves the special interest groups that serve him. Jim Martin, while a nice man, would not be a great senator. Both of these men stand for large government and fiscal irresponsibility that could lead to our country's economic doom. I'm the only candidate in the race who both understands the financial problems and would take action to solve them, while simultaneously taking care of Georgia, our state. Simply put, a nation built on debt is, or eventually will become, a weak nation. Whether you're a patriot, a parent, or a grandparent, or some combination thereof, I ask you to put country, children, grandchildren, and future generations ahead of party and vote for me. The more people that do, the better off we will all be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Saxby Chambliss will make his closing statement.
Well, thank you all tonight and thank the Atlanta Press Club for hosting us. You know, I've worked hard over the last several years for Georgians, and I have a strong record as a result of that. Whether it's working hard to make sure that we continue to purchase and build the F-22, the C-130, the C-17, or whether it's funding for our military bases around this great state. I have made sure that that funding was there, whether it's looking out for farmers and ranchers all across Georgia, or whether it's making sure that we move in the direction of becoming energy independent, as I have done by signing the Boone-Pickens Pledge to make sure that in the first 100 days of the next session of Congress that we implore the administration as well as the leadership in both houses of Congress to develop an energy policy that's going to move us towards energy independence. I've been there. I know what leadership is about. I've provided the kind of leadership that Georgians have grown and demand. And as we move ahead in these difficult times, it's more important than ever. I ask for your vote on Tuesday of this week. I'm humbled to serve as your senator.
Thank you very much. And the final closing statement comes from Jim Martin.
My fellow Georgians, let me talk to you just a moment before the campaign ends. I'm proud to be a Georgian. I'm proud to be a Vietnam veteran. We share common values. I know our families are in trouble right now because of the economic crisis. For 6 years, Saxby Chambliss has been your senator, and we've gotten record deficits, lost jobs, increased prices, and a $700 billion bailout. And even today, he won't take responsibility for his involvement in that. How can someone solve the problems that created this problem without acknowledging them in the first place? I've worked hard to represent ordinary people, working class people, middle class people my entire public life. And I'll do that. There are difficult issues that we face, and leadership is demanded. I'll work to make sure that we move this country forward. The question for everybody right now is, are we better off now than we were 6 years ago? And can we stand 6 more years of these policies? The answer is simple: no. I'd be honored to have your vote on this coming Tuesday. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. That concludes our debate. Our thanks to the candidates and to our panel of journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging tonight's debate. For more information about the Atlanta Press Club and tonight's candidates and future debates, log on to www.atlantapressclub.org. The debates aired on Georgia Public Broadcasting will be archived at that website. We'd like to encourage our viewers to go out and vote on November 4th. I'm Jonathan Seri. Thanks for joining us for Debates 2008.
This program was funded in part by a grant from the late Tom Watson Brown and by supporters of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Thank you.